I would say not officially. They have ceased firing for now between U.S. and Israel have conducted no attacks against Iran in the last 36 hours, almost 48 hours. The remaining issue that's outstanding is whether or not Israel will admit and the United States will admit that there is also a ceasefire for Lebanon. Iranians have been very, very clear. They're unyielding on this. If there is no ceasefire for Lebanon, they're going to walk out. They are not going to sit down, and they're not going to have this indirect negotiations with the United States. They're also demanding that the sanctions be lifted now, not in the future, no promise down the road, now, and that the assets that have been frozen, that those are released. So Iran's not backing off of that. And so the good news is over the last 48 hours, there have been no more bombings in Iran. But Israel went out of its way to try to sabotage the thing on Wednesday when they killed more than 300 civilians, women, children. It was horrific.
Larry's reply is blunt. Not officially. Ceased firing for now. No attacks against Iran in the last 36 hours, almost 48 hours. He highlights the outstanding issue, Lebanon and Iran's unyielding stance. If there is no ceasefire for Lebanon, they're going to walk out, sanctions be lifted now, assets that have been frozen released. The words Israel went out of its way to try to sabotage the thing. Killed more than 300 civilians, reveal how fragile the pause really is. Takeaway. Ceasefires built on selective silence crumble fast. True de-escalation demands every party admit the full scope of the deal. What if the next 48 hours break the silence?
There was an agreement reached in principle before it became publicly announced between the United States and Iran, brokered by Pakistan, where that the ceasefire included Lebanon. Everybody understood that to be the case. It was understood by President Trump when he called Benjamin Netanyahu, but the Israelis informed the president that this would create a political problem for them because, Hezbollah got involved in the conflict 5 days after the conflict began. So, and the Israelis are treating the conflict with Hezbollah as a completely separate conflict, an ongoing conflict. Israel mobilized troops. They have a separate Lebanon policy. Right now they're trying to implement to advance deep into southern Lebanon, then to annex the totality of that territory into Israel. This is part of their, national security strategy, so to speak. And so to suddenly have Lebanon linked to the, comprehensive peace agreement that the United States is seeking with Iran, that was disconcerting, politically impossible for the Israelis to accept up front. And so political games had to be played. Netanyahu rejected that. Trump then, the U.S. pretended that Trump had thrown away these 10 points, and Vance had to go out and say this was a mistake on the part of the Iranians. And this could have been done under the misguided belief that Iran would say, "Oh gosh, you're right. We don't." We don't insist on this, but the Iranians, stood their ground and says the Pakistanis came out very strongly, condemning the Pakistani Minister of Defense, condemned the Israelis in very harsh language. The Pakistani president called the United States liars and said without any shadow of doubt that this was an agreement. And ultimately, the United States my understanding is that Israel has in fact acknowledged that the ceasefire will extend to Lebanon because that is the only political dynamic that can exist. This is going to require Israel to, have to, eat things it doesn't want to eat. But they have no choice in this matter. Israel started this war. Israel is the one that on February 11th briefed the president on the ease in which this war could be won through regime change, suppression of missiles. The head of Mossad was there, giving the president intelligence briefings that were different from what he was getting from his own American advisors. The president went with the Israeli information. And so Netanyahu doesn't have too many cards that he's holding with his president right now. He's been embarrassed, disgraced. And the president had to buy him some political room. And that's what happened. There had to be a time for the Israelis to adjust to this new reality. But now, at the insistence of the United States, Israel acknowledges that this ceasefire
The words
extends
political
to Lebanon.
games had to be played, and Israel started this war, briefed the president regime change, exposed the gap between public spin and private reality. Israel's separate Lebanon policy and annexation ambitions were never on the table until external pressure forced the admission. Takeaway: when a separate conflict is suddenly folded into a comprehensive peace agreement, it proves the original framing was always dishonest. Follow for more unfiltered breakdowns that connect the dots the mainstream skips.
Hey, this become the hallmark of the Trump administration. If you ain't lying, you ain't trying. Okay, so I mean, look, the United States has been desperately seeking a ceasefire since mid-March because of the economic fallout. Now, there are some around. There is a clearly established pattern of corruption within the Trump administration. He comes out on a Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, like he did this week. So it's always in the first of the week where he either said, we're going to destroy them. And then like an hour and a half before the markets open, he'll say, oh, we've got a great opportunity for peace. It's going to be settled. Man, the price of oil starts falling. The stock market starts soaring. They've done that 4 times so far. And they just did it Tuesday. And what they're saying is not true. These people on Wall Street are idiots that they buy into this nonsense. Look, Iran was not the one seeking for a ceasefire. Iran's quite content. Yeah, they've gotten hit. They've suffered. The Israelis blew up a railroad, a Chinese-built railroad 4 or 5 days ago, and guess what? Iran finished rebuilding it today. So they're not wasting any time. You blow it up, we're going to rebuild it. So this is Iran's ready to continue to have the global economy in a chokehold. And anybody that's watched any kind of mixed martial arts knows that a chokehold can kill you. It can cut off the flow of blood to the brain, and what it is cut off the flow of oil. But some interesting things are going on behind the scenes now. Japan is sending a bunch of tankers. Apparently, they've cut a deal with Iran. They're going to get to sell a bunch of tankers into the Persian Gulf, load up on some Iranian oil, and sell back. And despite the United States said, but wait, you're our ally. And it's now every man or every country for themselves.
Larry's phrase, desperately seeking a ceasefire since mid-March because of the economic fallout, and the repeated pattern of corruption show how market timing, not morality, drives the messaging. Iran's refusal to back off sanctions and frozen assets is treated as stubbornness instead of consistency. Takeaway: when bad faith negotiation is dressed up as misunderstanding, the real motive is protecting the Sunday to Monday stock pump. Will the next market open expose the same script?
Nothing. This was a huge a strategic error on the part of the president, and a huge political error on his part too. Let me make it clear to everybody, and I know this is going to drive people insane. We didn't lose this war from a military standpoint, because we never fully engaged in this war. This was an air war, but the United States has escalation potential, but it's politically unviable. And so long as we remember that this is all about November, this whole war was about November. This war was a gambit on the part of Trump and his cabal of peace through strength aficionados to, this was going to be the 1, 2, 3 punch. Venezuela, Maduro's head; Iran, Khamenei's head. Then we meet with Xi Jinping, and we throw those two heads on the table, and we say, now, when we talk about the Pacific, you have to take us seriously. And the Chinese were supposed to quake and quell and surrender. We got the Venezuela part down, but Iran failed. Xi Jinping, we pulled out of the talks because we no longer had the foundation to talk with China. And in the meantime, the entire world's changed. I mean, I call this an empire terminating event. You talked about the Japanese sending tankers down. You know that there was a tripartite framework agreement between Japan, South Korea, and the United States confronting North Korea and posturing to contain Russia and contain China. Where we talked about nuclear submarines and we talked about nuclear warfighting, sharing plans, etc. All premise on the notion that America was going to be there to back everybody up. Well, the missile defense shield that we had put over South Korea, THAAD, Patriot 3, didn't work. And then we got rid of it. We broke it down, sent it off to Israel to replace the one that didn't work the first time around. The South Koreans and the Japanese right now, this tripartite framework agreement's finished. The United States can guarantee nothing. Japan understands how fragile and vulnerable they are economically, because if the United States can't guarantee the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, what about the Straits of Malacca down in Indonesia? What about the South China Sea where China has those islands? Japan just woke up to the fact that the United States isn't there to, if they continue to ally themselves, they're not going to get stronger. They're going to get weaker. Look at AUKUS, Australia, United Kingdom, U.S., another big, Pacific-oriented relationship. First of all, the UK's out. Starmer said, I'm done with America. So it's now AUS. And the Australians, they're done. They have the same problem as the Japanese, that the United States can guarantee nothing. We don't care about Australia. If we cared, we would have consulted. We didn't consult. And now they're going through an energy crisis. This is the NATO. NATO is just about finished. I mean, we're talking, the president and DeMarco Rubio were talking about pulling out 100,000 troops. And we're talking about being selective in terms of whom we support. That's the end of, collective defense. All of our strategic relationships that defined who and what we were geopolitically for the past 40 years, they're gone. They're finished. They're done, especially in the Gulf Arab states. It's over. So this is a huge strategic defeat for the United States. It goes beyond simply, what's going on with Iran. But the Iran picture, because everything I just said, the American people don't understand, Judge. I'm just sorry to say that they don't. I just finished talking to somebody who was like, this is the end of Trump. He's going to lose the November election. I said, dude, if you think you can call an American election in November, in April, you know nothing about American politics. American politics is where the American people are in September, and the American people aren't driven by what's going on around the world. They're driven by their pocketbook. It's the economy, stupid. That's the lesson Bill Clinton gave us. And this president has time to turn things around and put on a con game to get things where he wants them, but not if we're bogged down in a forever war in the Middle East. He has to get out of this war.
The words, "we didn't lose this war from a military standpoint. We never fully engaged," admit the limits of air power when escalation is politically unviable. Scott's "it's the economy, stupid" reminder ties foreign failure directly to November's pocketbook reality. Takeaway: when allies conclude the United States can guarantee nothing, decades of strategic relationships evaporate in weeks. Follow for more unfiltered breakdowns that connect the dots the mainstream skips.
I don't really think that factored in much. I mean, it was a consideration that, we still don't have the straight story about what was going on. Scott and I were together yesterday, and we talked about it. There's just a lot that doesn't add up and in the story, but that that wasn't the one they said, okay, now we got to get a ceasefire. It's true that we lost 480, let's call it $500 million worth of aircraft was lost in those 2 days from Saturday through Sunday. That's a pretty expensive bill. That's the largest loss of aircraft since Vietnam War. The thing I want to go back to what Scott was saying, because if you saw yesterday, the opposition candidate for Taiwan showed up in China for a visit, and so she's a very tall, good-looking woman, and she comes off the aircraft, and the embraces, the exchanges with the Chinese were very warm. They were not this official standoff. I mean, it was like, "Hey, buddy, how you doing? Good to see you." And she was talking about making a visit to Taiwan. That was announced after that. So what we're seeing, I think, here is a growing recognition, not only by China, but by Taiwan and the allies that had trusted the United States. They've seen the United States fail now twice militarily. And when I say fail, yeah, we got a Navy. But what good is it? Because if a country's got hypersonic missiles, that Navy has to stay offshore, which sort of defeats the idea of having a Navy, because you want to get an aircraft carrier up close to the combat aircraft off that deck and can penetrate into the interior. But now they got to stay offshore. The Marines, they like to they get their landing craft. I guess this was an LHA, the Tripoli, and it got close to shore and it started getting lit up with drones and missiles, so it backed off. So they're watching the United States, who promised, "Oh, we got your back. You want to align with us because we're the biggest, toughest, baddest guy on the block." And then look at what's happened to the Gulf. Already, Oman and Qatar have said, "We're with you guys." They're signing on with Iran. It'll be up to see what UAE and Saudi Arabia do.
The words, "they've seen the United States fail now twice militarily," and the Tripoli backing off under drones and missiles illustrate how visible weakness spreads faster than any missile. Oman and Qatar already signing on with Iran. The dominoes are visible. Takeaway: military hardware means little when the political will to use it collapses, and allies are watching in real time. What happens when your allies stop believing your promises?
Well, to be frank, I don't know exactly how battered they are because there's been effective censorship. But enough information has gotten out that the implication is they've been hit harder than they've ever been hit before. In that this was becoming a political problem for Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israelis always said going in that they can absorb a finite amount of damage, and they're willing to raise that parameter up as much as is politically viable, if and only if, and this is the important part, if and only if the guaranteed outcome is the end of the regime and no more missiles and no more nuclear program. They're not going to get any of those. And so now Netanyahu pushed for this war. He's the one who went and sold this war to President Trump.
Right.
He's the one who put the reputation of Israel on the line. And everything he said turned out to be a lie, to be false, be overhyped. As General Kane said, the Israelis tend to oversell everything, and we should be very careful with what they're saying. But Trump wasn't careful, and we went to war on behalf of Israel, for Israel, using Israeli intelligence. And now we failed. Israel's not going to get anything it wanted. There will be no regime change. The regime is stronger today. The missiles, they're there. Iran's not giving them up. And, the nuclear program, Iran will strike a compromise deal that allows enrichment, and that's politically untenable. So, Netanyahu is in a lot of trouble. I think tomorrow his criminal trial begins. And the thinking that the United States is going to fly cover for this guy after he got us involved in this war. I think we're looking, it's hard. You got to be careful when you talk about the demise of Benjamin Netanyahu because he's been such a political survivor for so long. But right. I've always said that the only way after October 7th, 2023, he stays in power is to continue to escalate conflict. That the only thing he has to sell the Israeli people is that he's the security guy. He's the national security guy, that there will be no security without him. Well, he just failed in the final test. The regimes of Iran's there. And remember, this is the war he's been pushing for a long time. He's been saying, we can't take Iran out without the help of the United States. Well, we went in all in. I mean, we put all the chips down there. We said, let's go. And we lost. We didn't get it. So Netanyahu's in a lot of trouble, a whole bunch of trouble.
And that's a pretty impressive statement coming out, as I recall. I think The Economist was or still is owned by the Rothschilds.
Right.
Yeah. So when they were ponying that up, look, I think we saw the New York Times had an article out earlier this week explaining how the title was how Israel drove the United States to war. And I read that article not so much for all the in and outs of who said what, but really to look at it and say, okay, who's going to be the scapegoat? Okay, so the villains in the article were Israel, Bibi Netanyahu and David Barnea, the Mossad chief, for lying to the United States. You had J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and to a lesser extent, General Raisin Kane pushing back on it. Both both, and John Ratcliffe, the CIA director. So
Ratcliffe was apparently quite critical of Barnea, and,
Yeah.
he may have been critical afterwards when the Times got these quotes. Anyway, sorry
Yeah.
for interrupting you.
And it was, and apparently Marco Rubio used Ray McGovern's expression about male bovine excrement in reference to what the Israelis were predicting. Now, the one that was clearly identified as the American scapegoat, Pete Hegseth. Man, he was like, oh, gung ho, and he was pushing for it. But ultimately, also the one that holds the responsibility that gets blamed in that article for doing this, Donald Trump, because they've got in their explicit paragraph saying he was told in no uncertain terms that Iran's likely to shut down the Gulf of Hormuz, and he was like, no, they're not going to do that. So when the media, like I said, when you've got a pro Rothschild's magazine putting that out.
The words everything he said turned out to be a lie. Oversell everything, and we went in all in, and we lost. Show Netanyahu bet Israel's reputation on American power and came up empty. The regime in Tehran is stronger today. Missiles remain, and enrichment will continue under any deal. Takeaway: leaders who stake everything on a war they cannot win alone rarely survive the peace that follows. Follow for more unfiltered breakdowns that connect the dots the mainstream skips. Question: how long until the next misunderstanding restarts?